would that be?
Yeah.
VARNES, like
Cite your source.
Being true to yourself never goes out of style.
I know.
It had like the blonde hair. My hair was like natural.
I see that X. Did you go somewhere last night?
Yeah, I went and saw the Frittata. They're like this little pop punk band that I've been into since high school. That's where my dad took me drove us to see them.
Wow, how cool.
Yeah, we both love them a lot.
Alright, ladies. First from
I'm sorry. I'm the first speaker. Nikki Kadavar.
Nikki, is it Nikki N-I-C-K or N-I-K?
N-I-C-K-I.
Lindsay, can you close that door?
Last name?
No, we don't
Kadavar,
have
K-H-A-D-I-V-A-R.
I would think just my dad.
D-I-V-A-R. V is in Victor.
Next one.
Corey, K-O-R-Y.
Cool.
Last name Hankins, H-A-N-K-I-N-S.
When
Yeah.
I was
It's
rehearsing,
just us in here. What is that?
Yeah. That's
Okay.
it.
What was your name?
Doesn't that make us feel
S-I-M-O-N-E, and then my last name is Haight.
Simone, you said?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And then what's your last name?
Haight, H-A-I-G-H-T. Yeah. Just look out. Okay, it's spelled
there's
H.
no audience.
Wait, what?
Members of this beautiful.
It's like use your imagination.
I asked for it. R-I-C-K-I.
You must be quick.
I have so many great.
So I have,
Yeah.
I have someone, a debater coming to help me. So, I think that we should wait.
Oh, yeah, good idea.
Oh,
Let's
But,
wait.
I'm just gonna go check really quick to make sure I'm not wrong. So, here we gotta do to prep, and then I'll check if we can start.
There you go. What'd you say the other time?
Shibuya.
Shibuya, yeah. I said Shibuya.
Shibuya.
I said Shibuya.
Shibuya.
Shibuya. I've never really heard Shibuya.
Yeah,
she said that one.
Oh, no, it's been a while.
Markers and shit.
Am I talking to the camera?
I'm making this look
Oh,
it's not
I was busy.
I think that's what they use to grade us.
Busy. Doesn't feel good.
I at least wish Cassie was here.
I know.
Yeah.
But she's gonna be biased though.
Yeah, she said she's not allowed to grade us. Like, I mean, obviously, because we're her
That's what I
class.
do that.
But yeah, I can't.
But that's their class, is it not? Is it?
No, I don't. Is y'all
Marissa, who's your recitation
Sarah?
teacher?
Morgan. Okay,
The
yeah.
one that came in here earlier.
It's totally fine.
Oh, I made this cute so we can pass notes and keep it this.
Alright, so hold on, give me that.
You're literally gonna be the only person.
Front row seat, still available.
Actually, you're not allowed to stand in the front row. There's like a space thing that we.
Is this a
I
big?
thought he was playing.
No, it's
Is he joking?
Oh, my stomach's been growling.
Are you doing CRISPR too?
Okay.
Growl?
Are you like
Yeah,
doing
she did
CRISPR?
great.
Or do you have
Oh,
to
you're not
really?
No,
What do you mean?
How cute.
CRISPR.
Oh.
I think next door is doing the. Yes.
Dude, I do this to most of my
Sorry,
kids.
no,
You're always like
have an
sitting in
audience.
class.
That's fine.
Let me color.
Yeah.
Wait, now we don't have an audience again? We're so
Sorry.
sorry.
I know. Same.
I just want one fan.
Yeah.
No thanks.
She did tell us when you came over that.
It's just some time. I'm just gonna go ahead. I can't find Brian, so I'm just gonna go ahead and say that we should get started.
Are you going to be sitting in on here too? In this too?
Yeah, he might like come in and out. I'm not really sure because I know he like can't be in like 65 minutes at once.
Yeah. I don't want him being here. I don't want anyone in here except for like a couple of kids that just.
Hey, are you Nikki or the other one?
No, I'm Kendall. I'm the other
Kendall.
one.
Nice.
Okay, guys.
That's fun. We'll talk about that later.
Yeah, thank you.
No.
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
talking about muscular dystrophy.
Okay.
Okay, I was
Cool.
gonna say.
I'm
Yeah. You're like, I've
do
got
what
a
you
script.
need.
Yeah.
Alright, we feel ready?
Yes.
Yeah.
Do I have to like stand up?
Yeah.
Because I'm gonna have all my stuff on here.
honestly, I'm not 100% sure on that.
I should be able
What?
to just chill.
What?
This is just a conversation. What's happening?
That's
If we
being
can sit or
recorded.
stand.
Yeah. Well, you know what? You guys are my first run, so if I don't say it.
Oh, great.
Okay. Let's get started.
Okay. Mohammed, Katie, Sarah, and I affirm the following resolution. The U.S. federal government should substantially increase regulations on CRISPR technology. For clarification purposes, we offer 3 definitions and 2 observations. 1, should, used to indicate moral obligation, duty, or correctedness. 2, substantially, which means very strongly made or built. And 3, regulations, a rule or order issued by an executive authority or regulatory agency of a government and having the force of law. Other definitions and sources will be available upon request. So, observation 1, according to the U.S. National Library of Medicine and the National Institute of Health, the 3 main areas that CRISPR technology is and will be used for is genetic defects, preventing the spread of diseases, and the improvement of crops and plants. Observation 2, the affirmative team advocates for the best possible way to reap the benefits of CRISPR technology. The affirmative will achieve this by placing quality regulations on CRISPR technology in order to ensure that it is being used safely, transparently, and effectively. The negative team has the burden to prove how regulations on CRISPR technology will directly result in unique harms in order to win today's debate. Contention 1, lack of regulations lead to monopolization. At present, there are no U.S. laws or regulations governing CRISPR research or technology. This lack of regulation means that whichever institution is eventually awarded the CRISPR patents will have enormous control over how the controversial technology develops. Its licensing decisions will essentially determine what kinds of research will take place in embryos, whether there will be limits on this research, and what kind of human genetic engineering might become commercially available. As we know, history has a tendency to repeat itself, so let's take a look at a similar situation with the Supreme Court ruling on June 13, 2013, in the case of the Association for Molecular Pathology versus Myra Genetics. In the mid-1990s, biotechnology company Myra Genetics used its patent to establish a monopoly over BRCA gene testing in the United States. In the absence of regulations around the genetic testing, the company's patents gave it an amazing amount of control, even in the face of significant uncertainties about the meaning of test results and the treatment options available. The simple problem with all monopolies, and in this case, Myra Genetics, is that the legal control that is gained by a company when regulations are not in place means competition is lost, which in turn keeps prices at an unaffordably high rate, reduces innovation, and slows development in research technology. We provided this example for three key reasons. First, it highlights how quickly monopolies assume power over patents when there are no regulations in place. Second, it shows how Myra's monopoly, much like all monopolies, deter competition, innovation, and development. And third, it shows a lack of how regulations lead to large and impactful uncertainties. Which brings me to contention 2, regulations increase innovation and efficiency. Regulatory framework conditions have been identified as important factors in influencing the innovation activities of companies, industries, and whole economies. Well-designed regulations may guide or even force companies to invest in innovative activities, implement innovative processes, or release innovative products in their full list of ingredients and chemical makeup. Furthermore, research shows that the characteristics of regulatory instruments and their flexibility toward implementation are crucial for increasing economic welfare. According to a research study and empirical analysis conducted by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the proposals for more innovation-friendly and innovation-targeting regulations can strengthen the focus on innovation and policy, increase the quality of innovation, improve the implementation of regulations to foster innovation, and lastly, integrate regulation into research on innovation systems. Contention 3, I'm going to be talking about regulations increase transparency, which is key for protection of Americans. According to the Washington College of Law, regulations are key to the development of transparency that support the functioning of sound markets. Insisting on the regulatory process is therefore a basic ingredient of transparency. In 2015, the White House called for modernization of the biotechnology regulatory system with a focus on updating the coordinated framework for biotechnology. The intent of this action was to formulate long-term strategy for products of biotechnology. In regulatory systems to efficiently assess risks associated with future products of biotechnology, to support innovation, protect health and the environment, and promote public confidence in regulatory process, which then increases transparency and predictability and reduce unnecessary costs and burdens. Plan 6. The affirmative team provides the following agent to CRISPR technology. The Coordinated Framework for the Regulation of Biotechnology, originally published in 1986 by the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy Solves. The Coordinated Framework consists of 3 primary agencies that the affirmative advocates for as a solvency: the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, the U.S. Federal Department of Agriculture, and the Food and Drug Administration. For all these reasons, we strongly urge an affirmative ballot in today's debate.
Alright, opposition.
Okay, my name is Nikki Kadavar, and I'm representing the negative side for CRISPR regulations. This House negates that the U.S. federal government should increase regulations on CRISPR technology. My opponent is arguing for stricter regulations of CRISPR technology, and I'm going to tell you why that is a wrong approach. I want to first start off by introducing the science of CRISPR technology so that you all have a better understanding of what the program is striving to accomplish. I also want to provide necessary background information in order to allow the audience to arrive at a concise opinion. This is quite possibly one of the biggest scientific advances our world has seen. To be able to see the power of science removing harmful gene-related diseases such as diabetes, cancer, and many other tragic diseases is truly a miraculous opportunity. Researchers are finding ways to make changes to DNA in order to treat diseases. This process is known as gene editing. CRISPR consists of 2 parts, guide RNA and Cas9. Guide RNA is a substance similar to DNA. Its main job is to locate the DNA that needs changing and stick to it. Cas9 is a protein that acts like a pair of scissors. Its role is to cut the DNA at the precise location that the guide RNA has stuck to. Once the DNA is cut, the cell can naturally repair. The cell should now contain a corrected set of instructions to form healthy cells. This is a simplistic explanation of how CRISPR technology operates. Moving on, I will now discuss the disadvantages of implementing stricter regulations for this technology. Regulatory measures and societal concerns about gene editing do not simply emerge in a vacuum. They are intimately shaped by countries' past experiences with genetic engineering. A major element of medicine and science is time. The process of gene editing is very time sensitive, and public concerns can not only lead to banning certain kinds of gene editing, but can also significantly delay policy-related decision making. If every single decision had to be discussed and debated over and then wait for approval, real change and progress wouldn't be done at the pace that it needs to. For example, if a woman who is pregnant wants to have gene editing done on her fetus in order to ensure canceling out hereditary diseases has to wait until approval, the time that it takes might exceed her birth and therefore has lost a life-saving opportunity. Another disadvantage is policy ruled by personal morals. If we look at the issue of abortion and analyze the problems that government regulations have imposed, whether it's religious beliefs or lack of understanding, we can then understand how that relates to the CRISPR controversy. If policymakers' decision on regulation is guided by their individual morals, that will greatly hinder any kind of real scientific progress. Moving on to less observed disadvantages, I want to discuss the effects that stricter regulations will have on the agricultural world. The economy of certain countries might face huge negative impacts. For example, environmental groups like Greenpeace have already called for Belgium, Sweden, and Finland to halt trials of CRISPR crops for the UK, to stop field trials of the oilseed camelina that have been edited to produce omega-3 fatty acids found in fish oils. As a result of this law, would prevent the sale of those products in the EU, which is the continent's largest trading partner. Another disadvantage when it comes to placing stricter regulations on CRISPR and when it comes to agriculture is that scientists and crop researchers argue that commercial and public support for the research will start to dry up, since nobody wants to invest in crop research that will never make it to the market. This would greatly prevent any advances for CRISPR because if we were to lose commercial and public support, this could make CRISPR dissipate completely, which is something we shouldn't want because CRISPR would have a hand in curing life-threatening diseases, cancer, blood disorders, blindness, AIDS, cystic fibrosis, muscular dystrophy, Huntington's. Everybody here knows somebody who has dealt with these horrible, deadly diseases. If there was ever a doubt that we should take more time to delay any advances for these cures, the correct measure to take is keeping regulations as they are right now. As I said earlier, stricter regulations will cause loss of commercial and public support, which in turn would disable proper funding for research and policy decisions, will delay time-sensitive processes, and lead to lost opportunities. To conclude my stance on this issue, I hope you all consider the repercussions if we were to add stricter regulations to CRISPR, and how these regulations will not only negatively impact future scientific and medical advances, but also agricultural and economic processes. Thank you. I received my time.
Alright, we're going to move into the crossfire section between the first speakers. So I'm going to give you guys 2 minutes, and then you guys can go ahead and ask each other questions. We'll get started with the affirmative if you have a question.
I do. Okay, so how many regulations are currently in place on CRISPR technology?
Right now, the regulations that are in place are within the clinical trials, and as far as, I can't give you a certain number, but they do take precautions within the trials. It is not discretion.
So while there are, while they do take precautions, are you saying that there are just no regulations, or you don't know the number of regulations?
I don't know the number of regulations, but there are regulations in place within the trials that they're experimenting on right now.
Okay.
You want to go ahead and ask a question to the affirmative?
Yes. The definitions that you guys said for regulations.
Yeah.
Was that limited to policymakers and lawmakers as far as the government?
Yeah, so a rule or order issued by an executive authority or regulatory agency of a government having the force of law.
And do you think that government only making decisions of scientific processes would hinder any scientific advances because they don't have certain expertise in that field?
No, not entirely, because they would go ahead and, I believe they would go ahead and consult with scientists on this. So it's not just the government who don't have any knowledge of this making regulations.
We still have about 30 seconds left if you guys.
Beautiful. Okay. What are some of the main responsibilities of the U.S. federal government, and would you agree that the protection of U.S. citizens is one of the main responsibilities of the USFG?
Of the government?
Yes. So would you agree that the protection of U.S. citizens is one of the main responsibilities of our government?
I do believe that the protection is one of the main responsibilities, but I also believe that the purpose of CRISPR technology, the sole purpose is to protect and save the human population. So they wouldn't be doing anything to negatively impact health. They'd be doing the opposite.
That's all the time that we've got. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the affirmative rebuttal.
I'm gonna stand.
Yeah, no, that's perfect.
Okay, just as a brief off-time roadmap, the structure of my speech is going to go first by addressing what was most recently brought up in Crossfire, then we'll go over the negative case and move on to extend the affirmative arguments. Is everyone ready? Okay. So in regards to the cross-examination, to answer our opponent's question, there are actually no current U.S. regulations in place on CRISPR technology. That's our Marcus 18 evidence that we can provide if needed. So the main problem that the negative team is assuming with the affirmative world is that we are trying to hinder the advancement of CRISPR technology. This is not true. The affirmative team is advocating that the best way to reap the benefits of CRISPR technology is by having regulations in place. And I'll extend that later in our speech. So just to go over the negative flow, their main arguments is that with regulations, it's going to be time sensitive in order to reap the benefits of CRISPR technology. We're going to have delays in policy making. Overall, if you can circularize their arguments in saying that regulations equals delays in progress and innovation. So we have a direct clash here with our affirmative case, specifically within our second contention. You can look to our first contention when we give you the narrative of mirrored genetics. The reason why this is important for today's debate is it's mirroring what we are faced with now with CRISPR technology. So basically what happened with the myriad genetics Supreme Court ruling is the University of Utah created patents on BRCA gene testing, which is like a breast cancer test. And what they did is they sold their patents to Myriad Genetics, who then monopolized the market. For over a decade, research and development was halted. There was absolutely no innovation being created, no research, no development. Finally, the Supreme Court had to intervene and open the markets up for competitors. This is the same situation that we're faced in now with CRISPR technology. The U.S. federal government has a moral obligation to make sure that CRISPR technology doesn't fall into the hands of the highest bidder. We need to make sure that the market is open for all competitors, and the only way to do this is through regulations. So again, the affirmative team is not advocating that we need to make sure that CRISPR technology, we're not advocating for stricter regulations, we're advocating for quality regulations. In the end of our constructive speech, Marissa read kind of our plan text, what we're advocating for. Essentially, the Coordinated Framework for the Regulations of Biotechnology, which was originally published in 1986, is essentially the plan on how to regulate things in a quality and an innovative or efficient manner. So there are 3 agencies that the affirmative team is advocating for. The first is the Environmental Protection Agency, the second is the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and the third is the Food and Drug Administration. In our first observation, we read to you that the main areas that CRISPR technology is currently being used for and will be used for in the future is genetic defects, preventing the spread of diseases, and improving crops and plants. So those 3 agencies cover all of that ground. So a vote for the affirmative team is a vote to ensure that we're not only using CRISPR technology in an efficient and innovative manner, we're also using it in a transparent manner. So that's really important. In the cross-examination, our opponents agreed that protecting Americans is one of the main responsibilities for the U.S. federal government. In order to protect Americans, we need to make sure that we know what's going on with CRISPR technology, and the only way to do that is through having regulations in place to make sure we're able to monitor the companies that have the rights to use CRISPR technology. Without regulations, essentially what's going to happen in the negative world is eventually the 2 current institutes that have the legal rights over patents is the Broad Institutes of MIT and Harvard and UC Berkeley. What's going to happen without regulations is a very similar situation to Myriad Genetics, where they're eventually going to sell their patents to a company similar to Myriad Genetics, who's going to have a monopoly over the markets. What that means for individuals like us, individuals that could benefit from CRISPR technology, is that prices are going to be unaffordably high. When there are monopolies in place, we have no competition, no competing companies and markets to drive prices down. So one, it's going to hurt the average American because the benefits of CRISPR technology will not be able to be afforded by normal middle-class citizens. But when we have regulations in place and we're boosting competition and we're boosting transparency, we can drive prices down and make sure that the technology is being used for safe reasons. Again, I just wanted to reiterate our definition of substantially. We are advocating not for stricter regulations. We can't have stricter regulations if we have no regulations in place. So that's a huge misconception by the negative team. Again, we're advocating for quality, strongly built regulations to make sure that CRISPR technology is, 1, won't fall into the hands of the highest bidder, secondly, will be used efficiently in order to increase innovation, and lastly, transparency. So ultimately, the voter, how you're going to weigh today's debate is going to be how can we best reap the benefits of CRISPR technology, and we'll show you throughout the round why the affirmative team achieves that.
So as the other team was talking about, they're not for stricter regulations, but what are you for exactly? We want to keep the regulation the same, but you saying how it can protect human beings, so you want stricter regulations. And as you brought up the FDA, well, the FDA approved of a mushroom that was a CRISPR mushroom, and they say it was very safe. So, and also, you said we're trying to make it affordable, but CRISPR technology is affordable. We have the facts to prove that. And also too, for CRISPR, you're talking about how if we have like stricter regulations, a lot of people won't get their hands on it. But even if you do add stricter regulations, people will find a way to get their hands on it. They'll probably try to find more ways since it's a stricter regulation on it. So, I received the comment.
All right. Now you guys have 2 minutes for a crossfire between the 2 rebuttal speakers. So I'm going to go ahead and start that. The affirmative has a question.
Yeah, so, do you have a definition for what a patent is?
Yes, a patent is when the government,
Or like
by
just,
a right.
in your own words, can you describe what a patent is?
A patent is when the government buys a right to a technology.
Okay, the affirmative would disagree on that. We would say that a patent is the ownership of an idea, not necessarily owned by the government. And do you know who currently owns patents on CRISPR technology?
No, I do not.
Okay, you can have the next question.
So, do you think the FDA, do you think their credentials, do you think they're qualified to make decisions on CRISPR?
Not to make decisions, but to make sure that CRISPR technology is being used within their regulatory parameters. So we do believe that FDA, along with the other two agencies that we offered in our case, are good fits to make sure that CRISPR technology is being used safely and transparently. So yes.
Okay then. And also, do you,
You can have the next question if there is a follow-up.
and who's to say we have to accommodate to lower class people?
Well, if all of the benefits that you bring up during your constructive speech, you're saying like the disadvantages, like for example, the woman who is pregnant and if she wants to reap the benefits of CRISPR technology and has to wait like a long time before that's approved, we would say that in the affirmative world that time would actually be better in the affirmative world because we're not being delayed with like halts in innovation as we saw with the mirror genetics example. We would also say that in order for CRISPR technology to be available to anyone, it needs to be affordable. And the only way for that to happen is if there's competition, which will not happen if there's no regulations to prevent a monopoly market. Can I have the next question?
You can, and that's the last one.
Okay, so how can the affirmative advocate for stricter regulations when there are currently no regulations in place by the USFG on CRISPR technology?
Well, the FDA, they approved of a mushroom.
That's not a regulation.
So we are now going to move on to the affirmative summary.
Alright, so as a summary, we have proved that there is no regulations on CRISPR technology, and the negative side has said that we are advocating for stricter regulations, but we're not. We're advocating for safer, more equal, and environmentally protective regulations. Also, to bring in more evidence and or to bring in more arguments, it's opening the gates to new generation of technology, and diabetes is a $250 million industry, and diabetes is $327 billion industry, and cancer is $174 billion industry. Epilepsy is $15.5 billion industry, and arthritis is $140 billion industry. And yeah, so no, basically we're just advocating that no regulations isn't safe, and that we should put them in place so that we can be more sure about what exactly we're doing and not just sort of taking things out of genes and not really knowing what's going to happen because they took those out for whatever reason. But
Okay, so a lot of us have been talking about regulations, and while regulations are very important, the evidence provided by my teammates and myself, I do believe we're prepared for the next step of the scientific process, because arguments can be made about morals and the logistics of human risk, but the facts are as follows. There are regulations in place so that the mothers have to have complete consent before beginning the process of CRISPR gene editing. You have to talk with a scientist in advance, and all of the regulations that are in place, while they're not officially sanctioned by the government, are completely up to the scientist's discretion, which I believe personally has the expertise to make those decisions. Tests so far have proven the success rate of genetic alterations multiple times, and the next step for advancement is most likely going to be human experiment. Think about the concern with early medication and drug testing and what a positive impact these results have played on society today. CRISPR is affordable enough for most parents to consider an option when compared to the other gene editing and altering I'm going to say medicines, but I know that's not the right word, on the market today. So designer babies are not a definitive result of CRISPR technologies. It's simply the improvement of human health and eradication of often life-threatening diseases such as HIV and different variations of cancer. Which, while you guys were mentioning the costs of these industries, I would argue that going back to the earlier argument that it's the government's job to protect the people, you would want to get diseases like cancer solved regardless of how much the industry is worth. I also want to go ahead and add one specific case study. In 2014, researchers at the University of Texas showed that CRISPR could correct mutations associated with muscular dystrophy in an isolated fertilized mouse egg, which after being implanted grew into healthy mice. Muscular dystrophy is a group of 30 inherited diseases that all cause muscle weakness and loss. And most people with muscular dystrophy will eventually lose their ability to walk. It often affects 1 out of every 3,500 boys, and until now there has been no cure. But with CRISPR's ability to correct these mutations in the rooms, muscular dystrophy could be eradicated entirely, and this leads to an increase in disability and longer lives with those diagnosed. So my question is, if it's already working and it's already been proven to be safe, why is there kind of such a concern with needing more regulations?
All right, we're gonna move into the grand crossfire.
Like
Everybody go off for 3 minutes.
Wait, I mean, we still have to like raise our hand, right?
Yeah, definitely
Okay.
don't just group each other.
Am I allowed to ask the first
Yeah,
question?
go for it.
Okay, so you said how, one of them, the third speaker, said how you don't know what's gonna happen when you cut the gene out, whereas in every CRISPR research, they have done the trials to know what happens when you cut the gene out. It eradicates the disease. And then you say how diabetes, cancer, and other diseases are a multi-billion-dollar industry. This proves that government regulation usually goes hand in hand with money, taxes, and the government putting their hands in places where they shouldn't be. The process of eradicating the disease is a one-time procedure.
What's the question?
I'm getting to it. The process of eradicating disease is a one-time procedure, whereas the diseases they're trying to cure is multi-step, multi-payment. They're constantly in and out of hospitals making payment on payment on payment, whereas you're saying it's not going to be affordable. The CRISPR,
For the sake of time, like, what's the question?
the CRISPR procedure is a one-time payment. You're saying it's unaffordable to certain people, whereas these diseases are going to
Actually,
be.
sorry to interrupt. I actually didn't say that we cut the gene out. I said that we cut the regulations out.
No, you say you don't know what happens when you cut the gene out.
I didn't.
To answer your question about the affordability, right now the patents have not been sold to a company because in September is when these patents were awarded. What's going to happen in the future with the same situation that we saw with Myriad Genetics, the company that monopolized the market, we're faced with the same situation. So eventually when UC Berkeley or the Broad Institute sell their patents, the company that buys it is going to have the power to jack up prices tenfold what they are now. In order to prevent that from happening, we have to make sure that regulations are in place to make sure that the market is not monopolized and that one single company does not have the power to keep prices at a high. When there's competition involved, that's what reduces prices low to make it affordable to the average American. Can I have the next question?
Yes.
Is that the last one?
Just
Okay, so I think there seems to be a misconception of what the affirmative team is advocating for. We agree that CRISPR technology is great and that there's going to be benefits received, but how do you suppose that CRISPR technology will actually develop and create into further more beneficial solutions if it's only in the hands of one company?
Well, it's not in the hands of one company. It's being worked on multiple levels, and it's done by scientist discretion. So there's actually several different groups that are working towards either the gene side or working towards trying to get different diseases
There are
eradicated.
several different groups that are working right now.
Okay, so I mentioned the one in University of Texas. There's also a group of scientists, I believe also in Texas, that are working to eradicate blindness in mice.
But in terms of like what's going to go on the market, right now there are only 2 people that own patents that are commercially available, correct?
Correct, but we're talking more about the actual scientific process rather than patent and cost.
If there's a scientific process, like, it doesn't matter if it's not commercially available to the market, because then all the disadvantages and advantages that you're advocating for aren't accessible
Accessible to who?
to the people.
So what is the disadvantage
If
of
something is not
having just one
commercially
company
available
own it?
to Americans, then, like, it doesn't matter if we have all of these amazing things. If we're not able to use them commercially, then it doesn't matter.
But don't you think that
Regulation.
the reason why it's not commercially available is because they're trying to already make it the safest form and to make it completely ready for public use, which therefore kind of goes back to your point of needing more
Well,
regulations to be
the
safer?
debate is coming, the resolution, word for word, I'll read it again, is whether or not the USFG should substantially increase regulations on CRISPR technology. You agreed in Crossfire that the USG has an obligation to protect its citizens. Of course, we should make sure that a product is safe before we put it on the market. So that's like the USFG's first responsibility. If they're putting something on the market that we don't know what the long-term impacts are, or how they're using it, who is able to sell it, and like what kinds of testings, then no, it should not be on the market.
So that goes back to why there are only 2 patents in existence today, is because they're still testing it.
No, the
before it goes
reasons
on the
why there's
market.
only 2 patents today is because there's no regulations, and regulations is key for innovation.
Alright, so we're gonna move into the final focus. So, let's start with the affirmative.
As a brief off-time roadmap, I'm going to provide the ultimate voters for today's round and summarize why the affirmative team has won today's debate. As of today, there are no current regulations on CRISPR technology. Regulating CRISPR technology by the U.S. government would avoid any potential monopoly in this industry. Protecting Americans is the responsibility of the U.S. government, and that would mean regulating CRISPR technology. The value of the diseases mentioned is worth over $600 billion, and we believe that providing regulations on CRISPR technology would minimize the industry and would minimize these industries, and it would be beneficial to all. I do just like to reiterate that, as we mentioned, if all these diseases are worth over $600 billion, and if the role of the U.S. government is to protect all its people, then I don't see why regulations would not be implemented in our society. We haven't made any more arguments. Negative team has no clash with the affirmative. They assume we are advocating for something we are completely not. You are going to be voting for a team that prevents monopolies, that creates a more accessible and competitive market, that improves innovation and efficiency, and provides transparency to protect its people. We are not advocating for restricted regulations. We are advocating for something that CRISPR desperately needs in order to thrive. We agree that CRISPR technology has many benefits and opportunities for innovation, but the only way and the best way to achieve these benefits is through regulating. The reason you will be voting for the affirmative today is because we prevent monopolies, we improve innovation and efficiency, and we create a more accessible and transparent market.
We're gonna go ahead and get the negatives for the focus.
Well, my name is Anamrasti, and I'm going to be summarizing the points raised as to why CRISPR technology does not need any more regulations placed further than how it is regulated presently, which is not regulated at all. This is honestly probably the biggest advancement our world has seen in technology for quite some time. To be able to see the power of science removing harmful gene-related diseases such as diabetes, cancer, and many other tragic diseases. This is honestly a miraculous opportunity. Now, public concerns can not only lead to the banning of certain kinds of gene editing, like we said, but research can also significantly delay policy-related decision-making. And if policymaker decisions on regulation is guided by their individual morals, that will greatly hinder any real opportunity of scientific progress. You can't govern morals or anything like that. Now, CRISPR is affordable, to further summarize, enough for parents to consider as an option, but it's not a practice that every single parent needs to enact for their child unless they wish to do so. As far as designer babies, that's not a definite result of CRISPR technology either, simply the improvement of human health and eradication of often these life-threatening diseases such as HIV and, like I stated before, other different types of cancer and other diseases. And overzealous regulations could significantly hinder the development of this promising new technology, as much as it has discouraged the use of genetically modified seeds as far as in agriculture and areas such as Europe. Recently, Europe specifically applied stricter regulations for CRISPR crops. Many scientists, however, are very unsatisfied with that, and they would agree that this proves how the system for regulating GMOs is not going to be successful if there are regulations placed on it. I hope that you would all agree that there's no way to possibly find out further, or research further and find out new innovations in science if you are hindering it by placing regulations on it. Banning research related to the genetic editing, like I said, is not going to only delay policy-related decision-making, but it could significantly alter the course of a human being's life. Delaying the access to this potential information that researchers could possibly obtain, that would give more of a comprehensive look as to what the potential dangers, and allow policymakers to see more of a bigger picture when making these policy decisions. Also, the more regulations that are placed on CRISPR technology will only further the distance that does now exist between those who are of low income and those who can access, who do have access to this life-saving technology. Leaving the technology to those who can afford it instead of all of those who need it. And furthermore, the government-backed regulations will also not be as informed as those who are in the scientific community and who are actually involved in CRISPR technology, making them incapable of rendering proper judgment when it comes to creating these policies involved with CRISPR technology. And I regress. Is that it?
It's over.
Oh my God.
It's over. I'm good.
Go ahead.
Inside.
I do have to pick a winner, so just like you can talk amongst yourselves while I do this. It's gonna be hard.
Oh, sure.
Wait, is there actually one? I thought this was more for fun.
No, there's a winner.
I mean, we're not gonna like.
Could potentially the winner get the same grade as the loser?
Absolutely. It's not like that.
Very intense. I'm gonna be right back.
He's gonna go pee.